podcast if you want to get your politicians to really hear what you have to say.
Yeah, that's also a good point. Okay, let's move on now and think about some of the areas where there might be some cooperation. And again, kind of think specifically about where solutions can come from. If government isn't willing to sit down and talk about these things, but there is some sort of consensus over it, how do we get there? So Bruce, I'll start with you. I know that you are very interested in state rights and how we can solve problems at that level. So I'm going to start with you, and you can talk about, tell us, the budget crisis is one of the biggest issues there's bipartisan agreement to ignore, but Bruce is trying to do something about it. So tell us what can be done.
Well, one of the wonderful things and strengths we have in the United States is that we do have decentralized government. And the greatest bulwark on protection of our own personal liberties has to do with the fact that the states created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states, as in so many parts of the world. So the states are independent, sovereign entities. And sometimes they have to act like that. And as citizens, if we like the policies of Delaware, well, you're free to move to Delaware. And if you like the policies of Oregon, well, you're free to move to Oregon. They're all unique, highly unique laboratories of democracy. And that's one of the benefits we have in our federalism system of government.
So specifically, what are you doing? Tell us about the states convention, because there's actually an active solution going on.
In terms of a rebalancing authority, many states have to the point state legislators themselves are not realizing their own personal authority as legislators in their states, and an education process that they do have not just to think about local and state affairs, but also others. And when federal affairs go awry, the problem shall hill to the states. So it's in the state's interest to be aware of what's happening and to use constitutional authorities they have, such as live in the Constitution.
Okay.
I could talk a long time.
I know you could. Okay. No, that's great. It's good to know that that's going on. Okay, Mark, where do you see solutions coming from that's not at the federal government level? What other institutions have we got which can make a difference?
Well, I think one of those places to look at very closely is the media, us, we journalists. It just amazes me that President Biden, and this is not a partisan observation now, this is a journalistic observation. It just amazes me that the White House press corps has been so compliant about the fact that President Biden has been extremely uncommunicative with the news media. The news media, according to the founders, is one of the principal accountability tools that we have in our system. And if you ignore it or you abuse it, then you're creating a problem for accountability. And in the final analysis, that's what our system is supposed to be about, is here, sir, the people rule, and government is accountable to the people. And we journalists need to be much more aggressive about demanding that politicians in both parties start answering some questions and giving us some straight answers.
Yeah, there are the questions coming from, both sides to both sides. It seems to be a problem.
Yeah.
All right, Robin, you get to ponder this a moment longer because we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to come back to you.
43 counties across this country. And what always just drives me crazy is that grown adults, have no idea how to get involved in the system. They can love to complain about it, but it's literally as simple as just showing up to a city council meeting or a county council meeting. They give you a couple of minutes at the beginning to express your concerns and hear directly from the community. So, like I said, all politics is local. I'd love to see more people get involved. Even just showing up at your local county Democratic Party or GOP party, they always post their events on their websites. and they're always desperate for volunteers. So just show up.
All right, good advice. So I'm going to throw out something radical here. I think from opinion polling, not political polling, but opinion polling, it's actually pretty clear that Americans agree on more things, have more consensus, more people are moderates, more people are, registering even as independents than our politics or media, reflects back to us. So I think the problem seems to be more about party affiliation, party identification than the actual policies, right? So let's talk about the areas where we have the greatest, where I think there is the greatest consensus, and how concretely you think that we can, let's talk about actual solutions or areas, concrete policy areas that you think we can come together on. Okay, Mark.
There is one area in particular, actually two. Bruce alluded to the other one, the national debt. But the first one that I was referring to is Social Security. We are approaching very rapidly a point where we will not have any choices about what to do to save Social Security. If Democrats and Republicans and independents don't stop accusing each other of all trying to destroy the system, and instead, let's talk about how do we save this thing, because there are millions and millions of Americans who literally depend on it from day to day. So I would suggest Social Security is going to force some level of participation and consensus that we wouldn't otherwise have. It's unfortunate that it would have to be forced, but there it is.
Okay, but let's talk about that, Bruce. What do you think about this? Because there's a crisis there, just like the debt crisis. I was thinking about it earlier. It's like everyone likes to, milk the cow of Social Security without realizing it's dying. So this is an unpleasant topic because it's going to mean cuts and people tightening their belts. And there's a lot of people out there who think that Americans aren't able or ready to do that. What do you think, Bruce? This is your wheelhouse.
Well, the good news about Social Security is that it is imminently fixable. And Social Security is a bit of a sacred cow, rightly so. Responsibility is people have paid into it, and we have responsibility to them. And most of them, people understand the legitimacy of keeping our pledge. Social Security itself will have to be trimmed as early as 2033. So that's 9 years away. The solutions are much easier if you deal with the problem sooner than later. And Congress, from informed sources, will deal with that issue when you get to the precipice of it and making adjustments in the Social Security system. So I'm not so much worried at this juncture about Social Security going away, but the federal national debt, which is a much larger issue, is continually to be ignored with the thought that we'll never come to that ultimate cliff and we can just keep on pushing the edge and printing more money. We could talk about the pros and cons and downsides, and much of my professional career is spent on trying to resolve that issue.
Okay, Robin, do you want to speak to... Oh, go ahead, Mark.
If I might just point out one historical fact that puts this discussion in some context. The last time the American government dealt in a serious way with Social Security was 1983, when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill were able to sit down and work out a compromise that most everybody could support. That's the kind of consensus that we need to get back to.
Okay, Robin, do you see that that's on the table for Social Security or any other issues you think it's more possible for?
Social Security is a huge issue, and that's one that we all do need to tackle instead of just pointing fingers and passing the buck to the next guy. And that's why I think people are worried about Congress and have such a low opinion of our congressmen and women that they're not doing enough to protect Social Security. But I'm also concerned about the national deficit, and I wish that more members from my own party were. The national deficit, as you pull up U.S. National Debt Clock right now.org, it stands at $104,569 per person in the United States. That's a debt that I don't want to pass down to my children. We need to be having more discussions about that. And look, I can tell you, as someone who served 10 years in the military, we can look to cut some of the fluff out of the military spending and some of the military industrial complex. There's a lot of wasteful spending there. I don't want to cut troops, but some of these Blackwater contracts and things like that, where they're paying $10,000, $20,000 for a bolt. We need to look into that.
Well, speaking of military, I learned from Bruce that we're paying more in debt servicing than our defense budget right now, and that's an alarming fact. I think if more of those facts are kind of talked about at the front, people will have more interest, perhaps, in talking about the looming debt crisis. Okay, are there other? Let's talk about immigration. Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
I'll just say, once people become concerned enough about the debt and become aware of how we got into that problem, and they beat the drum, that's going to provide some motivation, political motivation for Congress to step forward. But so far, Congress has been able to, just shuffle the issue down a couple more years. I'll be out of office, and there'll be someone else's problem.
Yeah. Let's talk about immigration, because I think there's a general consensus now that there's some problem there, or the border, illegal immigration, and that actually touches on Social Security too, and all these other things. So, okay, Mark, where do you think in that debate, where is there most likely going to be some coming together?
I hope there is going to be some coming together.
Where specifically? There's a lot of aspects to it.
Yes, there is. Very, very specifically, a very major news story today concerns the fact that a number of apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, Venezuelan gangs that have come here illegally in the last 3 years, just marched in, kicked out the resident managers, and took over. And the residents are terrified. And unfortunately, we're going to be seeing much more of that kind of thing in the days ahead. And
the crime implications.
Yes. And the one of the absolutely necessary things that has to happen, I think Robin used the term, stop pointing fingers at each other. Yes, the Biden administration opened the border. The Trump people did some things that they think did a great job, and it did, in fact, limit the number of people coming in. But this immigration problem has been a problem, a growing problem, ever since the Reagan administration. And sooner or later, like Robin said, we've got to stop pointing fingers, and we've got to start talking about real solutions.
Okay, the crime thing is interesting, and also the spending, because we see, communities, Lower East Side Chicago, for example, that are getting, or the East Side Chicago, getting frustrated that money is going to the migrants and not their communities. So what do you think, Robin? Appetite in your party, where can that consensus be on immigration?
I like to point out as often as I can, because I was Obama staff, that President Obama started the border wall. He got 148 miles of it done, which might not sound like a lot, but I get super frustrated as a Democrat when my party throughout Trump's administration was so opposed to a border wall when we didn't have a problem with it when Obama was starting it.
Really?
So I think that strengthening the southern border is an issue. It needs to be addressed. A wall is not the be-all and end-all solution, but it's something. We lock our doors at night in our homes, right? So let's lock down the southern border. It seems to make common sense, which is why yesterday I saw that Kamala Harris now is saying that she would continue the border wall. And I know that she came under a lot of fire from my party for that, but it makes sense. And we please, as Democrats, stop being just for something only when we're in charge.
Another thing
But
that
she
she
wasn't
said in that
for it
interview
when
is that she would have a
Trump
Republican
was in.
in her cabinet if elected, which is another potential avenue of solution. We'll see,
Flip-flop
what
Harris.
happens if that comes to pass. But it's an interesting prospect, and it has happened in the past of this country. That's
You would see, I believe, was Lincoln had multiple parties in his cabinet.
Yeah.
And we need to be thinking about people who are problem solvers, not what label is by your name. We need to be thinking about government, not politics.
there is a,
right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
As was rightly pointed out by Mark and Robin, we need our media institutions to be able to share information. I met a gentleman the other day who I called and said, hey, I saw a report of so many illegals being dropped off in San Diego where he lived. And, I said, are you concerned about that? He says, oh, no, we need more people in the United States. And I was sort of surprised by his reaction. But when the media begins to report that, hey, this is going on in Aurora, and this is going on here, and here are the consequences, and they hear that from multiple media sources, then people begin to pay attention.
Bruce, I've got to cut you off. We're heading up on another break here, but we will be back. And when we do